Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. In this video, I'm going to reveal some of the secrets of our stolen soul fragments and what this means for our growth. So thanks for joining me. Alright, so I'm going to start off with a little example of somewhere where you might sort of see this idea in, I guess you could call it pop culture. So a good example of what soul stealing is like is Ariel and Ursula in The Little Mermaid. So if you've ever seen The Little Mermaid, in order to get legs and go onto land to find her prince, Ariel goes to see the sea witch, Ursula, who, for a small fee, will allow Ariel to have legs, and in return she takes Ariel's voice. So Ariel sort of like harmonizes or sings, and then that voice gets captured into Ursula's locket. And then Ursula is able to use that kind of singing voice of Ariel and sound exactly like her. So that's sort of like the premise of soul stealing. And that in that scenario, in The Little Mermaid, I think there was sort of a agreed upon contract with that one where she has to sign the contract. But with soul stealing, it would sort of be like if she just stole Ariel's voice without Ariel's permission. So that's sort of what I'm referring to when I talk about stolen soul fragments or soul stealing. So it's not referring to the entire soul, but just sort of pieces of us that allow us to feel emotions or that contain certain memories or abilities. And these abilities are always something internal, such as, determination or like the ability to sort of it's mostly the ability to feel different emotions, sort of tapping into that magic of life. Those are the things that we lose with the soul stealing process. So there are several sort of ways to find your soul fragments. But before I go into that, another interesting thing is how you can know the age of the soul pieces when they left or when they were stolen. So the way you can tell that a soul piece, the way you can tell that you were a child when you lost the soul piece, whether it was left on its own or was stolen, is that it will sort of have this feeling of like nostalgia, almost sort of like a Disney movie. If you watch those in your childhood, I guess. It will just sort of have this nostalgic, happy, sort of innocent, sort of terrified feeling. As far as like the child was terrified, but the soul piece will feel nostalgic. So that's how you know it's a child when it left. If it's an adult, if you were an adult when that soul piece was left or stolen, then it'll feel angry, it'll feel hatred, it'll feel resentment, it'll feel bitterness, it'll feel these negative emotions that it was feeling when it was taken. So for some reason, the child soul pieces feel like this nostalgic, innocent feeling, even if the child wasn't necessarily feeling nostalgic or happy or magical in that moment. That's how those soul pieces will feel, and the adult soul pieces will feel those more negative sort of emotions. And the reason that they're negative emotions is because they probably wouldn't have left or been stolen if they were feeling great. So yeah, the feeling with this ties a lot into it. So if it's all about the emotions, and emotions are sort of looked down upon in our society. So the soul stealing is like perfectly normal in our society. So that's why when someone has strong boundaries or doesn't allow people to just sort of take whatever and then just, in order to get ahead, that is seen as weak or just weird. So it's definitely not something that everyone is working on, which is fine. Everyone will get there in their own time if they want to. Okay, so then the other thing is that why are people stealing these soul pieces? They're stealing the soul pieces because they want money, they want power, or they want some kind of fame. Those are typically the reasons people will steal these different soul pieces. It's almost like collecting these sort of trophies that they're then able to utilize to propel them into what they think is a greater life. They use the soul pieces to create as well as motivate themselves, but in order to utilize the soul pieces that they've stolen, they need to be sort of draining the energy from the person they belong to in order for them to activate those soul pieces, because the soul pieces that are stolen don't respond to the person who stole them's energy because they don't belong to them. They have to drain, using cording, they have to drain the person's energy who the soul piece belongs to in order to activate that and use that. So that's why fame can sort of be a double-edged sword, because if a person is famous, then they have everyone's attention, and they may have stolen all these soul pieces from them in other lives, or even in this life, but typically other lives. So this is something they've been working on. They steal pieces in this life, in the next life, in the next life, and then they take on when they take on that fame, if they get to that point, they're able to constantly harvest the energy from the people who stole soul pieces they've stolen in other lives, in order to activate them and use those abilities and emotions and that sort of power to usually get some kind of material wealth or gain, or power over others. So the reason I said fame is a double-edged sword is because if there is someone who is working on their soul retrieval into someone who's trying to become more whole within themselves and is sort of doing work like this, then they may sort of feel drawn to that celebrity in some way, or that famous person in some way, because they can feel this sort of weird connection with them, typically based on a past life where that person stole their soul pieces, or there was a situation with that person where the person who's not famous, or I guess they could be famous as well, but the person who is looking for their soul pieces, they did not, something happened with the famous person in this example where they either lost a soul piece with them due to something that person did, or side effects of that person. So it could be a situation connected to it where they lost the soul pieces, or that person stole their soul pieces directly. So either way, whether it's a situation or the actual person, they are being in the public eye. You're able to sort of draw back those pieces much more easily, because you can put a face to that person with the soul pieces that stole them. If there's someone who's sort of staying hidden, they're not famous, even though they have stolen a lot of soul pieces from people, you can still sort of find, the source of that by the different situations that you feel drawn to. So for example, you might feel sort of drawn to situations where someone's children are stolen. So in that case, your children may have been stolen by some person in another life, and then if you work through that situation and look at that life and get those pieces back from that situation and the person who stole them, you don't need to actually know who they are in this life, if that makes sense. So that's sort of just some secrets of the stolen soul fragments, and then to sort of leave it on a more positive note. So for the people who are having their soul pieces stolen, are there any benefits? So if someone has had their soul pieces stolen, are there any benefits for the victim? And there can be benefits because, well, not directly, but if you want to look at it in a more positive light, when you take on this other person's soul pieces, when they project them onto you, you're able to sort of master darkness and using that person's energy, typically unintentionally, without needing to become dark. So that's sort of how we're able to master light and dark, is because we're put into these situations of suffering and abuse and trauma and all these different lives. We lose our soul pieces along the way, whether they leave or they're stolen, and then we take on these people's soul pieces who are projecting them onto us, whether it's during a moment of physical trauma or prolonged abuse, or there's, infinite sort of scenarios where this can happen. But because we're taking on their soul pieces and losing ours, that's sort of the experience of suffering. So then when we get ours back and release theirs, all of a sudden we've now mastered the light and the dark. So that's sort of how it works, or at least how I have seen that it works. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. You can leave any comments or questions below, and I will do my best to respond. All right, thanks so much. Bye.